Trends in the world of gaming is nothing new. Developers and their investors have spent trillions of dollars and hours trying to follow the current big thing. Sonic after Mario, everything becoming a battle royale after the success of Fortnite, and most recently, month after month of releases of Souls-like since the chokehold Elden Ring had on the internet. But at the time of writing this, just this past weekend, was the so-called Weekend of Games, basically the new E3, wherein every major developer held presentations to reveal their next big games coming this year or early next year. And especially since December's Game Awards, I've been noticing a trend I was not expecting. There are a lot of fantasy games coming out now. Not to say that the genre went away or anything, but right now, there are more than I remember since E3 was still alive. Greetings, my name is Smitewings, your local fantasy enthusiast, and I'm here to ask the question, are fantasy games having a renaissance? Before we get into the why, we should first look at the what. And what I mean by that is to see what's on the horizon for fantasy games in the near past, present, and immediate future. Since just last year, we've had Oblivion Remastered, Expedition 33, 3 Dragon Quest remakes, Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, Fantasy Life I, Avowed, Final Fantasy Ivalice Chronicles, Monster Hunter Wilds, and those are just some of the bigger names in the genre. If you look at some of the announcements from last weekend and pair them with others that were announced last year, we have The Adventures of Elliot coming this month, a gorgeous HD 2D Zelda-like with characters and music that feel like they were ripped straight from a Dragon Quest game, and a world with a story that reminds me of Final Fantasy. Looking further ahead, we have the Fable remake, Divinity, The Witcher 4, D&D's Warlock, an Ocarina of Time remake, RuneScape Dragon Wilds, Dragon's Dogma 2 now also getting the Dark Arisen treatment, and eventually Elder Scrolls 6. And that's not even to mention what's happening in the indie scene. Last month saw the release of Yacht Club Games' Mina the Hollower, and while I have my own personal gripes with the game, you cannot deny the impact it has made on social media and streaming platforms like Twitch and YouTube. People are hungry for this stuff. Just look at last year's niche hit, Megabonk, taking a fantasy-esque approach to the ever-growing popularity of roguelikes, while sporting graphics reminiscent of the original PlayStation. It exploded in popularity among smaller streamers and pushed several on-the-cusp creators into partnerships off of viewership alone. Then we had games like Wizard Arena, Yap Yap, and Goblin Cleanup Crew bringing the genre into friend slop, along with a game I'm personally very excited for, Debauchery and Magic. TikTok has been enjoying using a clip from Jujutsu Kaisen to relate, describing this period as the new golden age of gaming. And while that's certainly an interesting idea, I believe we can narrow the scope and perhaps call this new era the next golden age of fantasy games. But why now? It isn't like fantasy as a genre is particularly new, and again, it never really went away. After all, gaming is already the ultimate fantasy anyway, being the most immersive form of visual entertainment in the big three next to books and film. So why are there all of a sudden so many games? First, I wanted to delve just a bit deeper into fantasy as a form of escapism. I mentioned this a bit ago, but we often use video games as a way to escape from reality. Immerse ourselves into a world not our own, and become the hero or even just some other guy or creature living a completely different life from us. That's why games like The Sims 4 and Animal Crossing New Horizons got so popular during lockdown. The escapist fantasy then was to hang out with friends or own a home and have a family. So 6 years out, what changed? Before I get into that topic, I wanted to look at trends in previous times and see if there were any resemblances to our current situation. So let's go ahead and look back at some of the biggest years for fantasy games in the last 2 decades or so. I'm not gonna lie here, there's not really a good way to track the data for volume of the releases of fantasy games by year, so I had to manually look through several years of game releases and keep up with games that kind of fit the bill for what I was looking for. I found 2 years that specifically stood out to me, but let me tell you that 2004 was absolutely stacked. We had the launches of RuneScape 2, World of Warcraft, the original Fable, The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap, Dragon Quest VIII, 5 came to the West, 2 Lord of the Rings games, and Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. The only other year I saw that quite stacked up like that was 2011, with Dark Souls heading up the front, Rayman Origins, yes I do consider that as fantasy, Dissidia 012, The Witcher 2, Zelda Skyward Sword, Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, Trine 2, The Sims Medieval, Skylanders, Magicka, and lest we not forget, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Skyrim has been re-released so many times that it's sometimes easy to overlook the impact that it had when it first landed, but I would argue that is why we've gotten the game on every platform since then. Because there are such trends in the gaming space, I wanted to also take a look at what major games have shaken up the landscape in the last several years. And I really can't do this topic without talking about my personal big 3 from the last decade, those being Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Personally, I largely attribute the overwhelming amount of open-world video games that have released since 2018 directly to the reveal and release of Breath of the Wild. Ones that stand out to me are Genshin Impact, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Elden Ring, and heck, even Sonic went open zone or whatever they called it with Sonic Frontiers. Breath of the Wild was such an incredible masterpiece at launch, just making it so easy to get wrapped up and invested in this massive and fractured world. Me and my girlfriend at the time literally spent hundreds of hours exploring the continent and just wandering through the lush jungles and flowing rivers of Eastern Hyrule. She had played lots of Skyrim before this, but to me, I had never seen anything like it. And of course, Elden Ring launched in 2022. I had always felt like it had taken some inspiration from Zelda with its relatively open-ended approach to progression and exploration, but even barring that, it was the first widely appealing Souls-like game that had gamers everywhere playing it, despite their seeming avoidance of the franchise up until that point. But now it feels like you can't go 1 month without either seeing a new Souls-inspired game, a port, upgrade, or remake of one, and they're constantly headlining sales on Steam. Even after both of those hugely successful and popular games, we got the return of a niche but highly regarded franchise in Baldur's Gate 3. And it is without a doubt the best game in the entire franchise, including the spin-offs. With its densely populated and lived-in world, easily integrated co-op features, complex and fascinated characters, along with its detailed, steamy scenes for both the book talk girlies and lonely nerds at home. It formed a perfect storm for social media buzz and a strongly dedicated fanbase thanks to the efforts of the team at Larian just pouring so much love and detail into crafting the experience. And while I'm not sure we've seen the fruits of what has been inspired by this game yet, I think we can safely say that games like the new Fable, Divinity, and maybe even Light No Fire will help to scratch some of the itches that Baldur's Gate leaves behind. My next line of thought was to then examine what made 2004 and 2011 so similar, or if there were any connections to our modern day, if there were any at all. What did the societal and economic climates look like, and what major events had recently transpired? Do these years actually look anything like where we are now? And while I tried making this a less Western-centric video, please do keep in mind I am American and lived through this period, so despite doing the research on world events, there's only so much I can accurately recount and relate, but I am doing my best. Anyway, in 2011, we were coming off of a year where we had a scare for a potential pandemic, that being swine flu. And the so-called War on Terror had been ramping up again over the last 2 years as multiple battles were fought in the Middle East across several countries. I do understand that game development takes time and that most of these games I mentioned were not produced between 2010 and 2011. That being said, there just isn't much of a through line that connects society between the years of 2007 to the releases of these games in 2011. Besides the previously mentioned increase in conflicts throughout the Middle East, and the worsening devaluation of several currencies, especially the US dollar as we hit a recession in 2008, and were introduced to the cryptocurrency Bitcoin not long after. Going back to 2004, we do have some similarities, with terrorism being at the forefront of many Americans' minds, as President Bush pushed for major efforts to be made into anti-terrorism military operations after the events of September 2001. We also had suffered a recession in the US that same year, starting as early as March and beginning to recover in November later that year. Now look where we are today, just 6 years out from the COVID-19 pandemic forcing people to stay inside, isolated. A recession following that, and now we have world powers constantly telling us that other countries' leaders are out to get us. Here in the US, we're bombarded every day with fear-mongering regarding an imminent technological takeover from China. We still have troops fighting in the Middle East, the situation in Gaza is still going on. And even besides those issues, artists and creatives are having their jobs and work taken by AI. Price of gas, entertainment, and even many necessities are increasing as our dollar's value continues to decline. Most of what I just mentioned is still a result of recovering from 2020 and the unchecked greed of corporations feeding into the AI tech bros that promise to save them money by removing human labor, becoming a novel concept since 2022. And if a lot of this sounds depressing, it's because it is. The point I'm trying to make is that I genuinely believe that this fantasy renaissance that I'm talking about is happening because people need an escape. A way to feel like they have control or can find some whimsy getting lost in a realm of magic and creatures. This has been a defining trait of fantasy since Tolkien, writing The Hobbit as a sort of analog after returning home from World War I. Take the new Fable, for example, as it seems to have a very deep roleplay experience where the player can step into the boots of an adventurer in a world of fantasy, and just be somebody else with all of its unique NPC and world systems, allowing you to live out a completely different and interactive life. We can step back into the comfort of something familiar when the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time remake comes along later this year as well. Video games, especially fantasy video games, are meant to be an escape. So come with me. Put your phone down, touch some grass, and let's go back to the pillow fort our cousins built in the spare bedroom. Turn the lights off, and sit way too close to the TV as we travel through Tamriel, or Hyrule, for the bajillionth time. If you made it this far, thank you for listening and supporting my first ever attempt at a video essay style video like this. I actually had a lot of fun writing and researching for this one, and I think I found a few other topics I'd like to touch on next time if you guys are interested. I was kind of inspired by this excellent video done by Jeff Thu over on Mother's Basement about fantasy anime being so successful in the 2020s. So if that's something that interests you, you can follow this link on the screen over to it, and if you feel like diving into a new fantasy world and supporting a small creator, you can click this other box here to go listen to the first 2 chapters of my original novel, Solis Umbra, in an audiobook form narrated by a human voiceover artist that I actually pay. Subscribe or give a thumbs up if you liked the video and want to see more of these from me, plus keep up with my monthly chapter drops for my book. Follow me on Blue Sky where you can see my art, or in my Discord server where you'll also get early and exclusive announcements or looks at what I'm up to, and follow me on twitch.tv/smitewings if you're into that. I recently took a step back from that because I have so many other projects in the works, but I still stream sometimes. Come say hi if you feel like it. Thanks again for sticking with me this far, keep flying high, and farewell for now.